the smell of cheap cigarettes mixed with the sour scent of warm milk. That was the smell of the suffocating hellhole I was living in. It wasn't physical abuse, and it wasn't poverty. The thing destroying me day by day, in this high-end condo, was an invisible, toxic suffocation that seeped into my very marrow. My name is Emily, and I was being held prisoner in my own home. This apartment in downtown Chicago used to be the pride and joy of my husband and me. But ever since I gave birth to baby Leo, and my mother-in-law, Brenda, moved up from the Rust Belt under the guise of helping with the grandson, it had turned into a stifling cage. She wasn't the simple, rustic grandmother I had mistakenly imagined. She was sharp, domineering, and carried the aggressive authority of a woman who had spent decades haggling in flea markets. "City girls are useless, can't even make a decent pot roast," was her catchphrase every morning. She forced me to scrub the hardwood floors by hand, making me kneel and clean every groove while my C-section scar was still throbbing with pain. I grit my teeth and endured it. For Jason, for the family I thought was my safe harbor. But Jason, the dignified engineering manager I married, revealed his true form as a spineless, pathetic man the moment he stepped through the front door. "Mom is old, Emily. She sacrificed her whole life to raise me. Can't you just suck it up for a bit?" That was the mantra he chanted every time I complained. He didn't know that what I had to suck up wasn't just verbal abuse, but the health of our son. I started smelling it, the faint scent of cigarette smoke clinging to the curtains, embedding itself in Leo's muslin blankets. I knew Brenda smoked, but she denied it vehemently. She blamed the neighbors, blamed the draft, even blamed me for having postpartum paranoia. Every afternoon, when I pushed the stroller out to take Leo for a walk, just to escape the stifling air, she forced me to stop at the expensive organic market. She demanded her specific brand of premium coffee and expensive pastries. She would sit on a park bench, nibbling on a croissant, playing the role of the sophisticated grandmother. Meanwhile, I was haggard from sleep deprivation, my patience wearing thin, fragile as a sheet of paper. But before I continue, please check if you've subscribed to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is the motivation for me to tell this heartbreaking story. The breaking point was dinner that night. I had just carried Leo out of the bedroom. The baby was coughing dryly. My nose, sharp as a hound's, caught the strong stench of smoke lingering on my son's pillow. My patience snapped. I slammed my bowl down, looking straight at Brenda, who was picking at a piece of fatty roast chicken. "Mom, I'm begging you. If you want to smoke, please go down to the lobby. I can smell cigarettes in Leo's room." The atmosphere dropped to absolute zero. Brenda dropped her fork, her face hardening, then turned to look at her son with the eyes of someone suffering a biblical injustice. "Did you hear that, Jason? She's accusing your mother of poisoning her grandson. Oh, Lord. I'm this old, and I have to be humiliated by my daughter-in-law." Jason's face turned beet red. He slammed his hand on the table, making the soup bowl splash over the edge. "Emily, shut up. Mom said she isn't smoking, so she isn't smoking. Don't push it. You don't smell it, or is your nose broken?" I screamed, the resentment suppressed for so long finally erupting. "Your son is coughing, Jason." A loud crack echoed. He swung his hand across my left cheek. It stung, dizzying. My ears rang. I stood frozen, clutching my terrified, screaming child. Jason stood there, hand still trembling, eyes full of aggression. That was the first time he had ever raised a hand against me. I turned to look at Brenda. She didn't intervene. She wasn't panicked. She was smiling a half smile, a smirk of triumph. She took a sip of water and dropped a sentence cold as ice. "See? You have to teach a wife from the moment she steps in the door. Don't let her climb on your head." In that moment, looking at the gloating face of my mother-in-law and the violence of my husband, I realized a brutal truth. I didn't have a family here. I was an outsider, a breeding machine, and a punching bag for them to vent their twisted frustrations. And I knew that smell of smoke wasn't just an annoyance. It was a declaration of war. That slap didn't wake me up. It stunned me. But in that stunned silence, the weak, people-pleasing part of me shattered, making way for a different instinct to rise. Survival. After that fateful dinner, the air in the house was thick as lead. Jason didn't apologize. He felt the slap was necessary to re-establish order. As for Brenda, she strutted around with the air of a superior who had just won an asymmetrical war. She began a campaign of open brainwashing, bombing us with the logic of a bygone era. Back in my day, I lived in a tiny apartment in Jersey, coal smoke everywhere. Jason grew up just fine, big as a linebacker, she said while chewing gum, her voice grating. You kids are too spoiled now, scared of everything. Treating him like he's royalty. Jason nodded, looking at me with reproach, as if my worrying about our son was a crime, an insult to his mother's child-rearing skills. I didn't argue. I stayed silent, the silence of a wounded animal keeping its eyes wide open, watching the enemy. Brenda thought I was afraid. She changed tactics. She no longer smoked on the balcony or in the living room. She disappeared into the shared bathroom, the one that shared a wall with Leo's nursery. 7 times a day, for half an hour each time, the exhaust fan buzzed at full capacity. She thought it was safe. She thought the smoke would vanish into the void, but she didn't know, or chose to ignore, that the ventilation system in this old building was outdated. That fan didn't push air outside. It swirled it around, pushing it through technical gaps, under the doorframe, and slithering into my son's room like an invisible, poisonous snake. Every night, I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to Leo breathe. At first, it was just a light sniffle. I reassured myself it was just the changing weather. But then, the breathing grew heavier. There was a wheeze, a faint whistling sound coming from his tiny chest, sounding like the wind moaning through a narrow crack. The baby turned pale, his sleep fitful, waking up screaming in terror in the middle of the night. I want to take him to the hospital, I said, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep, holding my feverish child. Brenda waved it off, holding a packet of dubious brown powder wrapped in newspaper. Hospital? What for? The doctors will just scare you and pump him full of antibiotics until his liver rots. I bought this herbal powder from an old healer in Chinatown. Just mix it with water and rub it on his tongue. Maybe steam some eucalyptus, and he'll be fine. I looked at the unmarked packet in her hand, my stomach churning. I knew these unregulated remedies were often full of lead and risks. Leo is struggling to breathe. This isn't a joke. I tried to stay calm. Don't try to be smarter than your elders, she glared, her voice sharp. Jason coughed all the time as a kid. I just rubbed some whiskey on his gums, and he was fine. Are you just making up issues to dig money out of your husband? I turned to Jason for help, but he was busy tying his tie, eyes glued to his phone, preparing for an important client dinner. Listen to Mom, Emily, he said, without looking at his son once. Mom raised me to be this successful. She knows what's best. You always overreact. Then he left, leaving me alone in the convenient but cold Assatum apartment. Jason was gone until late. When he returned, he reeked of alcohol, stumbled into bed, and snored loudly, ignoring me struggling to wipe sweat from our son. Ignoring Leo's cough, which was becoming more frequent, sounding like tearing fabric inside his chest. I was completely isolated. No one believed me. No one stood by me. They thought I was a paranoid woman, a clumsy mother. But they were wrong. A mother's instinct is never wrong. That night, when Brenda was fast asleep after a long day of caring for her grandson with criticism, I quietly went out to the balcony to hang laundry. The night wind cut through, cold and biting. I crouched down beside the withered potted plants that Brenda occasionally watered with leftover dishwater. I lifted the saucer under the large Dieffenbachia plant, and there it was. A pile of gray cigarette ash packed tight, hidden carefully under the damp soil, along with white cigarette butt slim ones, the kind for women burnt at the tips. She didn't throw them in the trash. She hid them here like a criminal destroying evidence, all to maintain the facade of a sweet, clean grandmother in front of her son. My hands shook, not from fear, but from rage. A cold anger ran down my spine to my fingertips. I didn't scream. I didn't run in to wake her up and make a scene. That would only get me another slap and baseless curses. I quietly went back inside and got a small Ziploc bag from the kitchen drawer. I put on latex gloves and meticulously picked up every butt, every crumb of ash, and put them in the bag. The zipper seal clicked, shut dry and decisive. I held the bag of evidence, staring at the filthy cigarette remains. This wasn't trash. This was proof of cruelty disguised as family love. This was what was attacking my son's lungs. I hid the bag deep in the bottom of my personal closet, the only place she never touched because she despised my cheap belongings. I returned to the bedroom and lay down beside Leo. The boy was still breathing in ragged gasps. I placed my hand on his tiny chest, feeling the weak heart beating rapidly. They wanted to play happy family? Fine, I would play along. But I would no longer be a pawn on this chessboard. From tonight, the countdown began. 2:17 a.m. Time seemed to stop, thick and cold. I jolted awake not because of a cry, but because of a terrifying silence. The wheezing in Leo's chest had vanished, replaced by jerky, gasping breaths, struggling for air. I flipped on the nightlight. The yellow glow hit my son's face. He was pale, blue around the lips. His chest was retracting deeply with every attempt to inhale. My entire body froze. I shook Jason violently. He was sleeping with his back to me, snoring carelessly. "Jason, wake up! He can't breathe. Get up!" Jason shifted, frowning and swatting my hand away as if shooing a fly. The stale smell of alcohol from dinner still hung heavy on his breath. "What? I'm trying to sleep." "Deal with it tomorrow. He's just stuffy. Are you going to get up or not?" I screamed, my voice cracking with panic. Jason cracked one bleary eye open, clicked his tongue in annoyance, panicking again. "It's just a blocked nose. You make a big deal out of everything." He pulled the blanket over his head and turned back to sleep. In that moment, the final thread connecting me to this man snapped. Not a gentle click, but a painful tear deep in my soul. I didn't shake him again. I had no time to waste on a heartless man. I grabbed my wallet, wrapped my son in a thin blanket, and bolted for the door. The apartment hallway was long and cold. As I ran past Brenda's room, the door remained shut tight. I knew she was a light sleeper. My screaming, my thudding footsteps, she definitely heard them. But she chose silence. She chose to keep her door closed to protect her sleep, ignoring her grandson gasping for air just a few yards away. In the Uber speeding through the quiet Chicago night, I held Leo tight against my chest. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't dare cry out loud. I was afraid my sobbing would drown out the weak rhythm of his breathing. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, eyes full of concern, and stepped on the gas without me needing to ask. At the ER of Lurie Children's Hospital, the cold white lights shone directly into my eyes, blinding and cruel. The attending physician, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, listened to Leo's heart and lungs, then looked up at me sternly. "Acute bronchiolitis with severe respiratory distress. Does anyone in the family smoke?" "Yes," I whispered, feeling like I was confessing a crime. "The boy's lungs are reacting violently. The lining is completely inflamed. If he continues to live in a smoky environment like this, his lungs will be permanently damaged. What kind of mother lets her child inhale secondhand smoke for this long?" The doctor's words were salt in an open wound. I didn't make excuses. I swallowed the bitterness, watching my son hooked up to oxygen, his tiny chest heaving weakly under the flashing lights of the machines. 2 days later, Leo was discharged. When I carried him into the apartment, a clumsy play had already been set up. Brenda rushed out of the kitchen, crocodile tears streaming down her face, slapping her thighs dramatically. "Oh, my poor grandson. Grandma is so sorry." "Stupid old grandma hurt you. I swear from today on I quit. I won't smoke anymore." Jason stood beside her, hastily supporting his mother, then turned to look at me with eyes that said I was the sinner who caused this mess. "See, Emily? Mom is crying and apologizing. She's old and just made a mistake. Don't give her the cold shoulder. Family needs to be forgiving." I looked at the two of them, one playing the loud penitent, the other playing the hypocritical judge. "Fine," I said, my voice void of emotion. "You promised, Mom." I carried my son into the bedroom and locked the door. I didn't believe a single word that came out of their mouths anymore. Trust was a luxury I had squandered too much of already. And my intuition was right, cruelly so. 3 days later, while Brenda went to church to pray for her grandson's health, I went into her room to clean the job Jason always said was the daughter-in-law's duty. On top of the wardrobe, hidden behind stacks of winter blankets, was a bottle of brain health supplements she took daily. I picked up the bottle to dust it, but it felt strangely light and rattled. I opened the cap. Inside, there were no pills. Nestled there was a sleek, cold metal device, an expensive vape pen. Next to it were small bottles of e-liquid with labels in English: juicy strawberry, watermelon. The artificial sweet scent of fruit hit my nose, nauseating and cloying. I stood frozen, gripping the bottle. So this was her promise to quit. She didn't quit. She just switched from gray smoke to scented vapor, from doing it openly to doing it secretly and more sophisticatedly. Did she think this strawberry smell was harmless? Or did she know full well it was full of chemicals but didn't care, because her addiction was more important than the lungs of a 6-month-old baby? I remembered the doctor's words. His lungs will be permanently damaged. I looked at the device in my hand, then out the window where Jason was on the phone, laughing. They weren't just thoughtless. They were actively harming my son. Slowly, quietly, under the guise of family love and fake sense, I slowly closed the lid and put it back exactly where it was. I didn't smash it. I didn't scream right then. An explosion of anger would only make them more defensive. I needed evidence. Chire undeniable. Living proof that couldn't be covered up by tears or sworn oaths. I pulled out my phone and placed an order for overnight delivery. A hidden camera. This war was only just beginning. The package arrived at noon when the sun hit the window blinds. The label said electronic components, but to me, it was a lifeline. A spy camera disguised as a USB phone charger, black, compact, and perfectly innocent looking. I plugged it into an outlet in Brenda's bedroom. The outlet was hidden behind a wooden dresser, but had a wide angle covering the bed and the window. I plugged another one in the living room next to the TV stand, where she usually sat watching soap operas and gossiping on the phone. "Mom, I'm plugging my charger in here, okay?" I lied, my voice light, not trembling in the slightest. Brenda glanced over, snorted, and turned away. "Yeah, whatever. Just don't run up my electric bill." She didn't know that from the moment the tiny LED indicator started working, her mask of morality would be ripped off. That night, I held Leo in my room. He was sleeping soundly after a dose of bronchodilator. I put on my headphones and opened the app on my phone. The screen lit up, showing sharp black and white footage from the next room. And I saw it. At 11 p.m., when the house was dark, Brenda sat up with surprising agility compared to the aching back and knees act she performed for Jason. She tiptoed to the window that was upwind and only 6 feet away from Leo's window. She cracked it open, pulled her kit out from under her pillow, the vape and the e-liquid. She took a long, deep drag, looking blissful, then exhaled a thick cloud of vapor. Through the night vision camera, the vapor looked like a milky white monster, curling and slithering through the window crack, heading straight for her grandson's room. As she puffed, she video-called her friend back home. Her voice rang clear through my headphones, every word a nail in a coffin. "Ha, you worry too much. My teeth are fine. Jason? If I so much as cough, he turns pale. And his wife? She thinks she's the queen of this house, trying to ban me. But she's green, amateur." She chuckled, taking another hit. "She keeps crying that Leo is sick. It's just her weak genes. I raised Jason in a cloud of coal smoke, and he's a manager now. These uppity city girls, acting like princesses. Makes me sick." I squeezed the phone, my fingernails digging into my palm. So, in her eyes, a mother's worry was just acting like a princess. Leo's health meant nothing compared to her ego and her habit. But the horror wasn't over. The next morning, while I took Leo to his vaccination appointment, the home camera recorded a scene that made the blood boil in my veins. 10 a.m. Brenda looked around to make sure no one was there, then snuck into our master bedroom. She opened my closet not to clean. She pulled out a teal silk dress, the dress Jason gave me for our anniversary, something I cherished and hadn't dared to wear yet. She threw it on the floor, stomped on it with her dirty house slippers, and then wiped the dust off her soles with the silk. "That'll teach you to show off. Having a kid, and still trying to dress up," she muttered, her face twisted with petty jealousy. Then, she went to the vanity, grabbed my bottle of Chanel No. 5, the only gift my father brought me from a trip abroad. She opened the cap, walked straight to the toilet, and poured it in. The sound of the flush roared, washing away that delicate scent along with the last shred of respect I had for this woman. I turned off the phone screen, sitting in the hospital waiting room. I didn't cry. My tears had run dry the night before. Now, inside me, there was only a block of ice. That afternoon, I came home. The apartment looked the same, but the air was thick with lies. As soon as she saw me, Brenda started wailing, fake tears flowing. "Jason, come home and see your wife." "She's so disrespectful. I just tried to give her advice on diapers and she called me a dirty hillbilly," she said. "If I don't have a degree, I shouldn't touch her precious golden child." I stood frozen at the door, watching this low-class theater. Jason, tired and irritable from work, immediately turned on me, face red. "Emily, you've gone too far. Mom swallowed her pride to come here and help you, and you dare insult her? Apologize to Mom immediately." "I didn't say that," I replied, my voice strangely calm. "You didn't say it, so Mom made it up?" Jason screamed, pointing in my face. "She's an old woman. Why would she lie? You think because you're educated you can look down on my family? Apologize." Brenda slumped into a chair, clutching her chest, gasping for air, her signature heart attack act. "Oh God, it hurts. Maybe I should just die so she's happy." Jason rushed to support her, throwing a hateful look at me. "If anything happens to my mother, I won't forgive you." I looked at them. A talented actress and a blindly foolish audience member. "Fine," I whispered in my head. "You want the truth? I'll give you the truth. But you won't be able to afford the price." I quietly went into the room, saying nothing. My silence infuriated Jason, but he didn't know I wasn't bowing down. I was preparing the counterstrike, and that weapon was named evidence. I placed my iPad down on the glass coffee table. A dry clack echoed in the suffocating living room. On the screen, the video paused at the 4-5-second mark. Brenda's face was wrinkled in glee as she dumped my perfume into the toilet, right after exhaling a thick cloud of white vapor into the air. Jason sat there, eyes glued to the screen. I waited for an explosion. I waited for the conscience of a husband, a father, to awaken when seeing his mother not only destroying property, but heartlessly harming his son's health with chemicals. But I was wrong. The silence lasted 1 minute, 2 minutes, and then shattered, not with an apology, but with his growling anger aimed at me. You dared to install cameras to spy on my mother." Jason shot up, face flushed, veins bulging in his neck. He didn't look at his mother's actions. He looked at my action as a heinous crime. "What kind of daughter-in-law are you, Emily? Sneaking around, filming an old woman? Do you have no shame? No morals?" I looked at him, feeling disgust rising in my throat. "You don't see what she's doing? Jason, she's destroying my things. And more importantly, she's vaping right next to your son's room. Are you blind? Or are you choosing to be blind?" "So what?" Jason waved his hand dismissively, defending her with brazen blindness. "Mom is old. If she has a hobby, so what? That dress, that perfume, it's just material stuff. If it's lost, buy another one. You care about money more than respecting your mother-in-law. And the smoking, maybe she just takes a puff to relax. You're blowing it out of proportion." Jason's words were the final hammer blow shattering the illusion of this marriage. In his eyes, my son and I would never be as important as his ego and his saintly mother. Right and wrong didn't exist. Only obedience was truth. "All right," I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "If you think damaging your child's health is a small matter, then we have nothing left to talk about." I pulled the signed divorce papers from my purse and placed them on the table. "Sign it. I'm taking Leo and leaving now." Jason looked at the paper and scoffed, a twisted smile of contempt. "Divorce? Who are you threatening? You think you can walk out of this house and survive? Let me tell you, if you leave alone. Leo is the heir to my family. Don't dream of taking him. And don't expect a single penny of assets. He thought I was still the naive college girl, dependent on his manager's salary. He forgot that my patience was born of love, not fear. "I'm not asking for your permission," I replied, looking straight into his eyes. "I'm informing you." Just then, the doorbell rang. Sharp. 3 short bursts. Jason frowned, moving to open it, but the door unlocked automatically. A tall figure stepped in, blocking the light from the hallway. It was my father. Frank wore his familiar worn khaki jacket, his shoes old but polished to a shine. He said nothing, just stood there looming like a mountain. The aura of a retired NYPD detective radiated from his sharp eyes, dropping the room temperature by a few degrees. Jason froze, his aggressive demeanor vanishing, replaced by awkward fear. "Dad, when did you get here? Why didn't you tell us?" My father didn't answer him. He didn't even look at Jason, as if he were air. He turned to me and nodded slightly. "Ready, sweetheart?" "Yes, Dad," I replied, lifting Leo from his playpen. "Pack what you need. Take what's yours. Leave the rest. Don't look back." Jason tried to rush forward to block me. "Dad, you can't let her take my son. This is my house." My father just glanced sideways. That look was sharp as a razor, containing a terrifying authority that made Jason choke on his words, his feet planted to the floor. "Your house?" my father asked, his voice low and slow. "I thought this was a gas chamber you built to incinerate my daughter and grandson." Jason opened his mouth, but no words came out. I quickly packed clothes for me and Leo into 2 large suitcases I had ready. I didn't take anything Jason had bought me. I wanted to leave as clean as possible. As I dragged the suitcases to the door, the elevator opened. Brenda was waddling back with a shopping basket. Seeing the scene, my father standing tall, me with bags, Jason cowering in the corner, she immediately understood. Her instinct to play the victim kicked in. She threw the basket on the floor and screamed in the hallway. "Help! Neighbors! My daughter-in-law is stealing everything to run off with another man. She's kidnapping my grandson. Police, arrest her." Neighbors started cracking their doors open. Jason was about to join his mother's act, but my father stepped forward, blocking Brenda's path. He didn't shout. He just leaned down, looked straight into the face of the wailing woman, and enunciated every word clearly enough for the whole floor to hear. "You better watch your mouth, Brenda. I haven't even settled the score regarding you using an electronic cigarette to poison my grandson to the point of hospitalization yet. I have the camera footage and the medical records in my hand. Do you want me to call the precinct right now to file charges for child endangerment?" Brenda's screaming cut off like a radio being unplugged. Her face went from red to pale white. She knew who Frank was, and she knew he never joked. Bullies are usually terrified when they meet someone stronger. She backed away, pressing against the wall, silent. I walked past her, head held high. I placed the house keys on the shoe rack, the beginning and the end of this hellish marriage. "Goodbye," I said, not really to them, but to my own foolish past. I followed my dad into the elevator. The metal doors closed, cutting off the image of Jason standing helplessly and Brenda trembling. I squeezed my dad's hand. His rough palm passed a steady warmth to me. We walked out of the building and got into his old pickup truck. The afternoon sun hit the windshield bright, blinding, but free. I had lost a roof over my head, but I had saved my son's life. And the real war, the war for justice, was only just beginning. The office of Mr. Sterling, a lawyer and an old buddy of my dad's from the force, smelled of coffee and the clicking of keyboards. It was quiet, a stark contrast to the circus I had just escaped. "Are you sure you want to go all the way, Emily?" Mr. Sterling pushed his glasses up, looking at me over a thick stack of files. Litigating against family is never easy, especially when it exposes the ugliest corners. I looked down at my hands, where the invisible scars of endurance still lingered. Then I looked at my father, staring out the window. "I'm not suing for revenge, Mr. Sterling," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm suing for justice for Leo. And for the assets I deserve." We mapped out a strategy. The lawsuit wouldn't stop at divorce. Mr. Sterling advised me to report Jason for domestic abuse, the slap, and, crucially, child endangerment regarding the vape smoke. Financially, I demanded half the current value of the condo, including the expensive renovations I had paid for with my savings. But the legal front was only part of it. I knew Jason's biggest weakness wasn't money, it was his reputation. That night, an anonymous post appeared on a large Chicago moms Facebook group. No names were mentioned, but the details about a dignified engineering manager, husband, and a mother-in-law blowing vape smoke into the nursery were specific enough. The post exploded like a bomb. Thousands of shares, tens of thousands of furious comments. The mommy mafia, the most terrifying force on social media, went to work. It didn't take them long to find Jason's identity and his company. The next morning, my phone buzzed incessantly. Not threats, but friends confirming the news. At his firm, Jason became the center of whispers. Female colleagues who used to admire his clean-cut look now looked at him with disgust. The CEO, a strict family man, called Jason up to HR to discuss ethics and company image. Jason called me. I looked at the name on the screen, took a deep breath, and picked up, putting it on speaker for my dad to hear. "You're real smart, Emily," Jason hissed through his teeth, sounding like metal scraping glass. "Trying to destroy my life? Delete that post immediately." "I didn't write it," I replied calmly. "That's the truth, seen and told by others. If you lived decently, who could smear you? Don't give me that crap. If you don't take it down, don't blame me for being ruthless." "You already are ruthless, Jason," I cut him off. "You slapped your wife. You let your mother poison your son. What do you have left to threaten me with?" I hung up. My hands were shaking slightly, but my heart felt light. Watching the bully squirm in fear brought a strange satisfaction. But I underestimated their shamelessness. Cornered, Brenda launched a dirty counterattack. She loitered in the condo lobby, sat on park benches, teary-eyed, telling her woe-is-me story to anyone who would listen. My daughter-in-law. She cheated, you know. She ran off with a man and framed me. I'm an old woman. I love my grandson. Why would I hurt him? She made it all up to steal the house. She played the victim so perfectly that some neighbors started eyeing me suspiciously when I returned to pick up mail. They whispered. I bit my lip, telling myself not to break. They wanted to drag me into the mud to protect their tattered honor, but mud can dry and become a weapon. 3 days later, when the tension was at its peak, Jason suddenly changed his tune. He texted, his tone suspiciously soft. "Emily, I've thought about it. Let's not hurt each other anymore. I'm tired. I agree to your terms." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I'll sign over the equity of the condo to you. Consider it compensation for you and Leo. Staying here haunts me now. In exchange, drop the abuse lawsuit and tell your friends to remove the post. I need to keep my job to pay child support." A condo worth over $500,000. It was too generous, too open for a man as stingy as Jason and his mother. My dad sat next to me, reading the text, his thick eyebrows knitting together. He tapped his finger on the table, a habit from his days analyzing crime scenes. "He's setting a trap," Dad said shortly. "I know," I nodded. "Jason never gives up anything without an angle, especially with Brenda pulling the strings." "But I'm going," I continued, my eyes determined. "I have to go to see how far they'll take this play. And to get back what's mine." I texted back, "Okay. Where?" "At the apartment. I'll have a lawyer there to witness tomorrow morning." I put the phone down. The old apartment once a home, then a hell, and now the stage for the final act. Jason thought greed would blind me. He thought I'd run back to accept his gift. He didn't know the woman walking into that house tomorrow wasn't the weak ex-wife anymore. I looked at Dad. He nodded slightly, patting the old Zippo lighter he kept as a keepsake. But this time, he slipped a tiny, professional-grade voice recorder into his shirt pocket. "Get some sleep, kid," he said. "Tomorrow's gonna be a long day." I closed my eyes, but in my mind, I was already standing before the door of apartment 1206. I was waiting for the trap to spring, not to be caught, but to break it. The heavy wooden door swung open to reveal apartment 1206. It looked unfamiliar and hollow, like a grave that had been robbed. Jason stood in the middle of the empty living room. The expensive paintings were gone, leaving discolored rectangles on the walls. The Italian leather sofa I had ordered was missing, replaced by the dusty wooden chairs Brenda had brought from her old house. They had liquidated the assets. I smirked. Just as I predicted, Jason's goodwill was a thin veneer over his greed. "Where's your lawyer?" I asked, ignoring the dusty chair Jason offered. Jason glanced at his watch, sweating despite the AC running full blast. Mr. Cohen is stuck in traffic on the Dan Ryan Expressway. Probably 15 minutes. You and Dad just sit, have some water." He pushed a glass of water toward me. I didn't touch it. In this snake pit, I barely wanted to breathe the air, let alone drink water poured by a traitor. In the corner, Brenda sat on a single chair, back stiff, her face plastered with makeup but unable to hide the tension in her eyes. On her lap was a red, lacquered wooden box. My jewelry box. I recognized it. It contained the gold and heirlooms my parents gave me on my wedding day. She had kept it for safekeeping and never given it back. Why did she have it out? To return it? Not a chance. She clutched it like a lifeline, her bony fingers rubbing the lid obsessively. "Let's step out on the balcony for some air," my dad announced. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up with a call. "Sterling is calling, probably asking for directions." Jason and Brenda exchanged a glance quick as lightning, full of calculation and relief. They thought my father, my only protection, was distracted. Dad stepped out, sliding the glass door almost shut, turning his back to the room. The opportunity had arrived. The trap was sprung. Brenda suddenly stood up, shedding her frail old woman act. She walked quickly toward the open living room window, which overlooked the awning of the floor below. "You want this, right?" she hissed, her voice cracking with manic excitement. "You greedy little witch, you want my family's money?" I frowned, stepping back. "What are you talking about? I'm here to sign papers." "Sign what? You came to rob us. You're a thief." As soon as she said it, she did something shocking. Brenda swung her arm and hurled the lacquered box out the window. It arced through the air, hit the metal awning below with a loud clang, and bounced down to the courtyard. Immediately, she ripped her own collar, messed up her hair, and bolted for the front door, screaming at a volume that defied physics. "Robbery! Help! She's attacking me. She's stealing my gold and throwing away the evidence. Oh God, help!" The scream tore through the morning silence. She threw herself on the floor, writhing, pointing a shaking finger at me, eyes wide. I stood rooted to the spot, stunned not by fear, but by the sheer audacity of this setup. They were willing to throw away a fortune just to send me to jail? No, I realized quickly the box was empty or filled with fakes. They had calculated every inch. Less than 2 minutes later, an impossible speed for a standard 911 call, 2 uniformed officers burst in. The door had been unlocked. They were waiting in the stairwell. "What's going on here?" One shouted, taking in the chaotic scene. Brenda, seeing the blue uniforms, wailed louder, snot and tears everywhere. "Officers, arrest her!" My daughter-in-law, she brought her father to hold my son hostage. Then she snatched my gold. I tried to take it back, and she pushed me down and threw the evidence out the window. She tried to kill me. The officer turned to me, his eyes full of suspicion. "Ma'am, stay right there. Let me see some ID." I looked him in the eye, then turned to Jason. This was the defining moment, the moment a human soul is weighed. Jason stood, pressed against the wall, his face drained of blood. He looked at his mother playing the victim, then at me, the wife he had once cherished, the mother of his child. "Sir?" the officer asked, notebook ready. "Did you witness this? Did she push the elderly woman and dispose of the property?" A second of silence stretched into a century. I saw Jason's Adam's apple bob. I saw the cowardice in his eyes, swallowing the last shred of conscience he had. He feared his mother. He feared losing the house. He feared his reputation being stained. He chose to sell me out. "Yes," Jason said, his voice trembling but clear. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "I saw her struggle with my mom. She pushed Mom down and threw the box out. I couldn't stop her in time." His words fell like a death sentence on our marriage. Brenda smirked through her fake tears. The 2 officers approached me. One unclipped handcuffs from his belt. "Ma'am, you need to come down to the station to answer some questions regarding assault and robbery." I stood encircled. My dad still hadn't turned back from the balcony. They thought I was trapped. They thought the trap had snapped shut perfectly, locking the naive prey in a prison of false accusations. But they forgot one thing. When you corner an animal, never leave a small gap in the balcony door. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I looked at Jason, deep into his avoiding eyes, and smiled. A cold smile that made him shudder and step back. You just signed your own conviction, Jason. The click of the handcuffs was sharp and cold, like a blade cutting the thick air. The young officer stepped toward me, his face set in grim determination. Brenda was still moaning on the floor, but her eyes glinted with a wild, triumphant light. Jason stared at the floor, unable to meet my gaze, the man who had just sold his soul for a coward's peace. They thought the game was over. Hold on. 2 short words. Deep, resonant, like thunder in a clear sky, coming from the balcony. My dad slid the glass door open. He didn't rush. He wasn't panicked. His tall shadow fell across the floor, eclipsing Jason's cowering form. He put his cell phone in his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet with a badge worn, but powerful. He held it up for the 2 officers to see. I'm retired Detective Frank Miller, NYPD Homicide. I suggest you gentlemen pause before making a false arrest. The 2 officers froze. They looked at each other, then at the badge. Their attitude immediately shifted, a measure of respect entering their eyes. Sir? We're just responding to a call. Responding to a call is procedure, Dad said, his voice like steel. Letting perpetrators play you for fools is bad police work. Jason snapped his head up, his face ashen. Dad? What are you saying? Mom is injured. Shut your mouth! Dad barked. The single command made Jason flinch as if struck. Dad slowly pulled not the phone he had been using, but the tiny, professional-grade recorder from his pocket. The red light was still blinking. You want evidence? Listen closely. He pressed play. Through the tiny speaker, the static cleared, and the voices of Brenda and Jason rang out, loud and clear, undeniable. In a minute, I'll throw the box down and start screaming. You have to back me up immediately. We have to do whatever it takes to put that bitch in jail. If she has a criminal record, custody of Leo will automatically go to you, and we keep the house. Do you understand, Jason? Then came Jason's voice, trembling but complicit. Yeah. But Mom, be careful when you throw it. Make sure the cops don't get suspicious. I've thought of everything. You just have to swear you saw her push me. I'm this old. Who wouldn't believe me over her? I already called in a fake tip to the local precinct. Those 2 rookies should be here any minute. The recording ended with the sound of a window sliding open, and Brenda's feigned, theatrical scream. Absolute silence filled the room, a silence so profound it was terrifying. The 2 officers spun around to look at Brenda. The woman who was a pitiable victim just moments ago was now exposed as a conniving fraud. Brenda's mouth hung open, her face shifting from pale to a ghastly gray. She tried to stammer a denial, but the sound choked in her throat. Jason, meanwhile, was trembling so violently his knees buckled, and he sank to the floor, unable to stand. But I wasn't finished. Dad had delivered the fatal legal blow. Now it was my turn to deliver the financial execution. I stepped forward, pulled a thin file from my handbag, and threw it on the table in front of Jason. You were trying to trick me into signing a waiver to get this house, weren't you, Jason? Jason looked up, his eyes wide with terror and confusion. You think I'm stupid enough to trust you without doing my research? I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. I pointed to the property title search I had printed that very morning. You secretly transferred the title of this condo to your mother 6 months ago as a gift. You don't even have the legal right to promise it to me. Your plan was to lure me into dropping the abuse charges and taking down the social media posts, and then you would walk away laughing because any agreement we made would be void, right? You were going to leave me with nothing but the brand of a fool. The truth was laid bare. The depth of their deceitful scheme was exposed for all to see. The younger officer's voice was hard as he grabbed his radio to call it in. We have a situation here: false reporting, conspiracy to commit fraud, and perjury. I need a supervisor and a bus. Fraud and prison. Those 2 words were arrows that found their mark in Brenda's weak point. Her eyes widened, she clutched her chest. Her body began to shake uncontrollably, and then she collapsed. This time, it wasn't acting. The stroke she had so often feigned had become a brutal reality, brought on by the shock of her own self-destruction. Her body hit the floor with a dull thud. "Mom, Mom!" Jason screamed, crawling to her side. He then turned to my father and me, tears streaming down his face, clasping his hands together. "Dad, please! Emily, I'm begging you. Forgive my mom. She's old. She can't handle prison. I was wrong. I'm a horrible person. I was wrong." He began banging his head on the tile floor, the sound sickeningly hollow. The image of the dignified manager was gone, replaced by this pathetic, groveling wreck at my feet. My father looked at Jason not with pity, but with the pure contempt reserved for a man who failed to protect his family and failed to teach his own mother basic decency. "Don't call me Dad," he said, his voice glacial. "You are not worthy of the title. Let the law teach you how to be a man." He turned to the officers. "Gentlemen, follow your procedure. I will provide the full audio file and all supporting evidence to the district attorney's office." I looked at Jason, weeping hysterically beside his unconscious mother, and felt nothing, not a shred of sorrow. My capacity for pity had been burned out of me the night my son was rushed to the ER. "Let's go, Dad," I said, turning and walking out the door. We left that toxic apartment behind, the wail of approaching ambulance sirens echoing in the distance. The elevator doors closed, and as they did, the doors of a prison both literal and metaphorical were swinging open to welcome them. They wanted to play an all-or-nothing game, and they had lost everything. The lawyer's office that afternoon was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic whir of the ceiling fans slicing through the tension. Jason sat opposite me, head bowed, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. The poised manager was gone, as was the aggressive husband. In his place was a pathetic failure, desperately clinging to his last lifeline. "Emily, I'm begging you. If I get a felony conviction, my career is over. My mom is in the hospital. She had a minor stroke after the shock yesterday. How can you be so heartless?" I met his gaze, my own eyes like ice. The same old sob story, the same plea for mercy now that the blade of the law was at his throat. $80,000, I said, my cold voice cutting through his whining. Jason's head shot up, his eyes wide. "What? That's the price for your freedom and your mother's. $80,000? That covers the money I spent renovating the condo, compensation for emotional distress, and the legal fees I've incurred dragging you both into the light. Wire the full amount, and I will consider withdrawing my complaint." "Where am I supposed to get that kind of money right now? You know my salary." "Sell the condo," I replied flatly. "The one you and your mother valued more than the lives of me and my son. A quick sale should get you there." Jason trembled. He knew I wasn't bluffing. The condo, the hollow fortress of vanity they had used every dirty trick to keep, was now the very thing they had to sacrifice to save themselves. 2 weeks later, the deal was done. Jason had to sell the condo in a rush, at a bargain price, to get the cash to pay me. After paying off the mortgage and my settlement, he was left with almost nothing. The day I received the wire transfer confirmation was the same day I heard he had been fired. The power of social media and the stain on his character made him too much of a liability for his company's board of directors. A manager who assaulted his wife and aided his mother in a criminal conspiracy was too risky for their brand. He lost his home, his job, and his honor. Jason had to move Brenda, now with a distorted face and partial paralysis on her left side from the stroke, into a squalid, damp rental in a rough part of the city. I heard from distant relatives that Brenda, confined to her bed, became more bitter than ever. She cursed Jason day and night, blaming his weakness and incompetence for losing the house. And Jason, the man who once worshipped his mother, now spent his days drowning in cheap whiskey to escape her constant abuse and the bleakness of his reality. One rainy afternoon, a package arrived for me. The courier said an old woman had asked him to send it. Inside, the worn newspaper wrapping was our wedding album and a small bag containing some of Leo's keepsakes, his silver baby bracelet, a few newborn outfits I hadn't had time to pack. Tucked inside the album was a piece of paper torn from a child's notebook. The handwriting was shaky and crooked, the writing of someone whose hand was now weak. I spent my whole life scheming for my son, and in the end, I made him lose everything. I was wrong. I'm returning these to you. I hope you can find it in your heart to let Leo have a good life. I read the words, but my heart was still. There was no wave of forgiveness. This repentance was far too late. It only came after they had lost everything, not when they saw my son turning blue in his hospital bed. I put my son's keepsakes in a box, but the wedding album I threw straight into the trash. That past was not worth saving. A few days later, Leo's preschool teacher called me, her voice hesitant. "Emily, for the past few days, there's been a man sort of hiding near the school gate at pickup time. He looks very scruffy. He just stares at Leo, but never comes closer. When the security guard approaches him, he runs away." I checked the security camera. I think it's Leo's father. My heart clenched. That afternoon, I went to pick up my son early. From a distance, I saw that familiar figure hiding behind a large oak tree. Jason. The once handsome, well-dressed man was now gaunt, his face covered in stubble, wearing a wrinkled, yellowed shirt. He stood there, shivering in the early winter chill, his eyes hungry as he watched the children playing in the schoolyard. When he saw me leading Leo out by the hand, he flinched. He instinctively took a step forward, but then froze. He saw his own pathetic reflection in the window of a parked car, then looked at Leo's bright, happy smile next to me. A crushing wave of self-loathing washed over him. Jason turned and shuffled away, his slumped figure disappearing into the bustling crowd. He understood that he had forever lost the right to be a father, to be a husband. I squeezed my son's hand and took a deep breath. The air today felt so clean. With the $80,000 settlement, my own savings, and help from my parents, I bought a new condo. Not in the expensive downtown area, but in a quiet, leafy suburb, a home in my name alone. A place where I chose the clean, white paint for the walls. A place where I could throw the windows wide open every morning to let in the fresh breeze, without fear of any smoke sneaking in. I walked into my new home, the smell of fresh paint still lingering, the smell of a new beginning. I placed my keys on the kitchen counter and watched the golden afternoon sun dance on the hardwood floors. I had walked through hell to find my own heaven. They thought they could bury me, but they forgot I was a seed. The deeper they buried me, the stronger I grew. That old life was closed behind the door of that mental prison. Now, my dawn was breaking. 2 years. That's enough time for a deep wound to scar over, and for a seed once buried in ashes to push its way to the bright sun. I stood before the full-length mirror in my walk-in closet, adjusting my cream-colored blazer. The reflection was no longer a disheveled woman reeking of sour milk and the tears of sleepless nights. Reflected back at me was Emily, the creative director of a prestigious advertising agency. My eyes no longer held fear or avoidance. They were sharp, determined, and full of life. My suburban condo was flooded with natural light. There were no dark, damp corners, no haunting smell of smoke, only the gentle scent of lemongrass essential oil and the sound of Leo's joyous laughter echoing from the living room. "Mommy, Mark is here." My heart fluttered gently. A pleasant rhythm I had long forgotten. I walked into the living room. Mark was on one knee, meticulously snapping the last piece of a giant puzzle into place with Leo. Mark, 35, an architect with big, rough hands that were surprisingly gentle. He was a single father, raising a young daughter close to Leo's age. We had met at a weekend art class for children with autism, a place we both brought our kids to learn to better understand their worlds. Unlike Jason's superficial charm and empty promises, Mark was as solid as reinforced concrete. He never said, "I'll take care of you." Instead, he would quietly show up on a weekend to fix a loose bookshelf, change a burnt-out light bulb, or patiently run after Leo's tiny bicycle under the hot summer sun, his shirt soaked with sweat, but a smile never leaving his face. "All done, little man," Mark said, ruffling Leo's hair. He looked up at me, his eyes warm, filled with the understanding of a man who had also weathered the storm of a failed marriage and learned to appreciate the sunny days. "Finished with work? Your dad just called. Said your mom is making her famous lasagna, and the whole family has to be there." I smiled and nodded. My father, the retired detective with eyes that could see into a criminal's soul, had initially scrutinized Mark as if he were a suspect in an unsolved case. He watched every gesture, weighed every word, terrified his daughter would fall into another pit. But Mark didn't perform. He was just genuinely, authentically himself. I'll never forget the evening the two men sat across from each other, with a bottle of good bourbon. My father, a little tipsy, clapped Mark hard on the shoulder, the validating gesture of one good man to another. "You'll do. A man doesn't need a lot of words. What matters is if he's willing to stand in front of his wife and kids when the storm hits. I'm entrusting Emily and Leo to you. But remember, I still keep my service revolver in the safe." Mark laughed, raising his glass. "Don't worry, Frank. I can't promise Emily the world, but I can promise she will never have to cry alone again." And I believed him. Because this time, my trust wasn't based on blindness, but on a kindness that had been tested and proven over time. Today was Leo's 3rd birthday. The small apartment buzzed with laughter. Mark's daughter and Leo chased each other around a superhero-themed birthday cake. My parents sat on the sofa, their faces glowing with contentment. I stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights, the cool night breeze playing with my hair. This feeling of peace was a luxury, but one I had earned. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. I opened it. There was no sender's name, but I immediately knew who it was. "Happy birthday to my son. I'm sorry, I still watch over you. I hope you have a better life than I did." It was Jason. I could picture him, sitting somewhere in that damp, cramped apartment, next to his partially paralyzed, bitter mother, typing these words with hands that trembled from cheap liquor and late-stage regret. He had lost everything: his family, his career, and the right to watch his own son grow up. I felt no hatred and no pity. My heart was as calm as a lake with no wind. That was the price he had to pay, and he was paying it every single day. I didn't reply. I refused to let the shadows of the past cloud the clear skies of my present. My finger swiped across the screen. Delete. Block. A clean, decisive action. I turned my back on the darkness outside and stepped back into the warm, golden light of my home. Mark was lighting the candles on the cake. Leo saw me and waved excitedly. "Mommy, come here, blow out the candles with me." I walked over and wrapped my arms around my son. The little boy, who was once pale and gasping from smoke, was now rosy-cheeked, his lungs strong, his soul nourished by real, unconditional love. Mark took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Make a wish, Em," he whispered. I looked at the beloved faces around me. I looked at the flickering candle flames. I didn't need to wish for anything anymore. The greatest miracle had already come true. I had fought. I had been silent when I needed to be, and I had roared when I was cornered. I had walked through the ashes of betrayal to build my own castle. They think a divorced woman is a failure. No, she is a phoenix, reborn. I leaned down with my son and blew out the number 3 candle. The wisp of smoke that rose was thin and fragile, carrying the sweet scent of buttercream. It was the only kind of smoke that would ever be allowed in this house. Happiness had finally called my name. This story carries a powerful message. Patience in a marriage has its limits, and that limit is the safety of your children and your own self-respect. Don't let the word family become the chains that imprison you in toxicity and manipulation. When a woman who is cornered falls silent, it isn't submission. It is the quiet, intelligent preparation for a counterattack. Be brave enough to let go of relationships that have rotted. Arm yourself with knowledge and financial independence. Because only when you dare to cut out the tumors of the past does life have a chance for a brilliant rebirth. Happiness always belongs to those who dare to fight for it. Now, if you liked this story, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know which part surprised you the most. Every subscription and comment is a huge motivation for us to continue sharing meaningful stories. Thank you so much for watching.